Um,
Hold on.
I, I'm glad it's late here. So if people have already started having adult beverages, it's okay.
You know what? I I just ran out of time. My husband, I went down there and I was like, "Do I have a drink?" Because I just got my voice back. And
Yes, I know. I'm so happy. It's wonderful.
um,
Okay, people are jumping in. This is awesome.
hi everybody.
Happy Wednesday. We're almost
Lots
through
of
this week.
lots of new members as well,
Awesome.
which is really exciting. Um, Hi everybody.
Hey,
Uh,
Marianne. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. Hi Marta. Um, Marta, can you do me a favor? Can you send the link for this to Joy? Um, she didn't realize, I think she may not have realized she had to sign up and she was asking me for it. So could you maybe send the link to her so she
Awesome.
can come on in? Thanks.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what I would do without Marta.
Hey,
She's the best.
Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Marta really is the best.
Isn't she good? She's
Absolutely.
she's really lovely and just a nice uh dedicated and proactive person.
Yeah.
Oh, you should be. You should be blushing. Okay. Hi, everybody. We're so glad you're here. I know that this is, depending on where you are in the world, is somewhere around either lunchtime or around dinner time. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. This is our last event with Ebony for this course. We might do a couple of other things, but she is obviously a very busy person. She's got some other exciting stuff coming up. And we have appreciated every moment of your time and the time you spent working on this course. So this is just like a little extra just for members, where you have some sort of intimate one-on-one time with Ebony and myself. But Ebony, to be honest, she wrote this whole course. Like normally I collaborate, but she just straight up dove in. And
Joy's in. Yes.
yay, Joy's here. And so I'm so thankful for her for making this possible. And really, she's the best person to answer a lot of these questions. I have also worked remotely, so I might chime in here or there, but
Yes.
really, Ebony's the person that you really want to be talking to today during this time. So what I want you guys to start doing is one, put in the chat what you're drinking. We were just
Yes.
saying, I meant to grab Prosecco.
Let
I
us
was just
all
trying to feel a
know.
little bit better. And I saw my husband had a beer and I was like, I decided against it. And I saw his beer and I was like, damn it.
Yeah.
So, cup of tea. See, I've got a cup of tea back here in my little elk.
Kappa.
But, and then I'm going to start popping, please, your questions in the Q&A part. Red wine, Sarah. That's my girl, Sarah.
There it is, Sarah.
So who here has dived into the course? Let us know. Put in maybe
Dove in.
takeaways. And I'm gonna have, so anyone that doesn't know Ebony and didn't attend last week's webinar, it was sort of an open webinar. Ebony, why don't you just introduce yourself quickly, and then we'll start diving into some questions we have already prepared and been sent, and then we'll start taking other questions.
Sure. So I'll just quickly give a rundown. I first want to say thank you, Lauren. It has been such a pleasure collaborating with the officials. Your group is so amazing, so tight knit, so incredibly inviting and helpful, which is exactly the kind of vibration and energy I love to see in administrative groups, rather than sort of being competitive and it being a race to the bottom. It really has been, how can we help each other get to the top? And I absolutely love it. I am really looking forward to future collaborations. I love everyone on your team, all the people who are making it possible. Your beautiful children, they're so amazing. I have seriously, I know, right? I have seriously found my admin sister. You're like my mom's sister. I just literally love it, because like having another mom who is also an assistant to talk to and just like shoot the shit with, has been so great and wonderful. Quickly about like my background. So I've been an executive assistant for a little over 7 years. I've worked primarily in Los Angeles and San Francisco. I've worked in academia, nonprofit, tech. I now work in fintech, as well as corporate retail. So previously, I supported the president and CEO of Sephora, everyone's favorite makeup company. And yes, I got a ton of free makeup, and that is the major thing I miss about that role. But Calvin has since gone on to become the CEO of Lululemon, and is doing really well over there. Following that, I supported the founder and CEO of a company called Twitch, who recently just surpassed sort of their biggest streaming milestone of 1.3 billion minutes streamed in a single month,
That's crazy.
which is insane.
Everyone's at home gaming, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And I started supporting Emmett shortly after Amazon acquired them for a little under $1 billion. Both of my previous bosses reported directly to two of the wealthiest men in the world. So Emmett reported directly to Jeff Bezos, and Calvin reported directly to Bernard Arnault. So I have a lot of experience working in really high touch, prominent environments. And now I currently support the founder and CEO of a company called Protocol Labs. My boss is really an inventor, an engineer, founder, CEO, in the same vein as sort of Emmett Shear, Mark Zuckerberg. He invented something that is called the Interplanetary File Sharing System, which is what they use in the Greece space station and what they will use eventually when we get to Mars, to share communications between planets. But in the meantime, what it does is it allows the internet to become distributed. So things like Netflix not being able to stream in high definition will no longer be a problem. So we are actually currently, we just recently announced, we've been privately collaborating with Netflix over the last couple of months, building out some infrastructure for them. And he's also launching one of the most anticipated cryptocurrencies in the world called Filecoin. He really is inventing something that has never been done before. If you ask sort of anyone in the internet space, from, you know, Tim Berners-Lee to Dan Bona, who he is, they are close friends with him. So really exciting stuff happening there, incredibly technical and research heavy, but blockchain technology is something I'm incredibly passionate about and will probably be fueling a lot of what we all do over the next 20 years. So it's really exciting to get started at the ground level.
I'm writing down Netflix and Protocol Labs because that is something I'm going to look right up after we get out of it, because that sounds really interesting. And I have like 50 questions about distributed web, and I'm like, it's another time. It's another place.
Let's get into that though.
Yeah.
We should do a webinar on like Web3, blockchain technology, cryptography, and really like.
I love it. I honestly
info
love
sharing.
Distributed web, and it's starting to like click for me now. Like I've heard you talking about it enough times, and I'm like, wait a second. If this is what I think it is, this is very exciting.
Yeah.
So, okay. So thank you so much for that introduction. I can also say that Ebony is just, she's a class act. She's someone who went out for what would seem like extreme jumps in her career without fear. She took advantage of things that literally, because others didn't, it really helped get her foot in the door. Excuse me.
100%.
And I think that's so worth assistants knowing about. And I kind of did the same thing, as I took a leap and I reached out to her when, you know, everything, my travel planning course was not going to be relevant anymore. And she totally just said sure and jumped right in. So, and I know how busy you are. And so but she is just the remote assistant. She is the best authority on this right now. And you can see that in the course. So we're going to dive in with some questions, and then
Awesome.
Please, anybody ask your questions in the Q&A section here. So some of these have already come up like just as discussion in the Slack community. So I'm going to start there.
Cool.
So, okay, so remote work is fabulous if you need a flexible working situation. But as we are all learning, it has its challenges. What did you find the hardest for you to get used to when you first began working from home?
That's interesting. As an executive assistant, I think the biggest challenge was really sort of how would I create and maintain a connection with my boss if we we never sat together. We weren't next to each other day in and day out, which was the working relationship that I was accustomed to across my career. Not necessarily day in. I mean, both of my previous bosses traveled quite a bit, but generally we could count on about 40% of our in-office time, being together. I was really confused at first, and I wasn't sure how I was going to sort of create and nurture that connection. And one of the things I learned from a really amazing coach called Rich Litvin was about the power of individual conversations, really protecting those individual conversations as a way to nurture connection, deep connection between people. So not just sort of like, hey, we're professionally aligned, but really understanding what motivates them, what are their business priorities, how are best practices around their productivity, what kind of collaboration style do they work best with, and also sort of like what makes them tick, what do they do in their free time, are we going to share a laugh, are we going to share tears, frustration, and anger, and be like, oh, I can't believe this is happening again. All of those intangible things that really make you more than just an assistant but a partner. So I really focused on creating high impact one-on-ones. And it's something that I protect because I really feel like as an assistant, you have to see yourself as one of the most important people in your boss's business. And if you see yourself as sort of disposable and dispensable, you are more likely to move your one-on-one off of the calendar and say like, oh, well, he or she needs to meet with the CEO of this time and they can only do this time. Don't be afraid to push back and say, no, these are the times that we meet. And that doesn't mean you can't be flexible, like move your one-on-one down or up, but do not move it off the calendar. So if that 30-minute slot just moves around all week, that's completely fine, but make sure that it stays there. I would encourage every assistant to do this in office, but it becomes incredibly important when you are not seeing them face to face. It humanizes you, which I think does a lot to like make an investment in what I call your emotional piggy bank with your boss. When you have savings in that emotional piggy bank and things go wrong or haywire, they can draw from that emotional piggy bank and know, hey, I know Cindy or Ebony is having a tough time. I know that she's got 3 kids and is already stretching herself. We've both been pushed to the limit this week. They're more likely to extend you grace and be understanding. And so leveraging those one-on-ones to create opportunities for that. The thing that I always encourage assistants to do is to really structure these conversations. So that way you don't go into your one-on-one every week scrambling for like, what am I going to put into this? I would say like, the main things I do is like do a check-in, like a warm-up at the top of the conversation. So I'm checking in to see like, hey, did you have a tough week? I know you had that conversation that you didn't really want to have with the board of directors. How did that go? Is there any follow-up that we should be worried about? Any blowback we think might make its way over here? And usually, depending on if they've had a hard week and the kind of person they are, they'll be willing to start oversharing. And then the second thing I get into is high impact, high value questions. I call these like exponential questions, right? So what I'm asking for is like to elicit an understanding and alignment on what our priorities are, what the concerns are, and what are some blockers. And then the third thing I do is like align on action items. What are the takeaways from this one-on-one? We need to improve in this area. We failed a couple ways here. How could we get better at making meetings more efficient? How can we make sure that you're less stressed during the week and you have enough time to do the things that you want? Do we need to set you up with a business coach? Should I be looking into a great podcast for you to get a quick download on high level industry topics quickly? What are the takeaways? So that's how I structure my one-on-ones with my executive. And then we leave time for feedback because I personally believe deeply in cyclical feedback and the importance of that. So that's how I would say that's been my toughest struggle, but that's kind of how I've overcome it in a remote environment.
There were so many things. Like I haven't muted my mic, but I'm gonna have to mute. I'm gonna mute it on the next one just to make it clear. But like I wanted to say so many things. The part about I was literally just talking to someone today about the part about being human, and making that connection. Like when I go into an interview, I literally will look for any excuse to make a human connection with them and not talk about work. Like to say, oh, this office is so well designed. did you have anything to do with this? Or, oh, I was late because my dog, I don't have a dog, but my dog, I was worried about
Right.
my dog doing this thing. Do you have pets? Like anything to
Right.
remind them that I'm human and for me to see them as human. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
And also, so what, look, a follow-up question from this, there's two. So one is actually a member submitted question that came up in Slack that I think just because of what you said is good to follow up on. But my other question is, have you ever met your boss? Did you interview remotely? Did you interview in person?
Yeah. So I did not meet my boss ever for the first 7 months that I worked with him. 7 months after I started working with him, I met him in person. It was the interesting thing is it was almost like we didn't realize we hadn't met each other because that's how close we
Yeah.
were. Like we talked all of the time, like every single day we talked to each other. So, and you text them. So it's weird to like be texting and talking all the
Was it
time and not
anticlimactic?
yeah, it really was. It was like we just gave each other a big hug, like, and was like, "Oh my God, we're finally meeting." Hey, it was so great, just to actually meet in person. But no, we've only, well, I mean, I now part of the reason is because I was actually nursing when I started my position.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I wasn't traveling anyway because and I told the company that when I started, like I will not be able to travel for the first 9 months because I have a 7 or 6 month old. So I'm not going to be traveling. And they were like, yeah, absolutely not. Totally fine. So that was the first time like my daughter had been weaned and I was like, yes, I'm going on our company trip, which was awesome. Now we see each other about once a month for a week or so. Well, sans Corona, but
Right, right.
yeah.
Well, I only just thought of that as you were talking. Like, wait a second, how did she interview only
Yeah.
remotely? Did she like
Yeah.
when did she meet him? So that's really because that
Pre-
whole part of it is remote as well, like the whole thing with video calls and getting to know people that way. Okay, so the follow-up question is based because you were talking about stand-ups and your weekly meetings or your daily meetings or whatever with your boss. And so, oh God, I please hope, is it Francois? Is that how you say your name? I hope that's right. Oh my God, I hope that's right. But she asks, one question I wouldn't mind asking is, when having weekly catch-up meetings with your executive, does she think it's a good idea to have an agenda in mind so as not to forget anything? And so one, is it good to have an agenda? Would it be a good idea to send it to your executive prior to the call so that they can add their own items? Or maybe keep it open throughout the week so that you both can add items to it as we remember. So is it good to have an agenda? And then how do you, yes, Francois, thank God. Okay. So, and then how do you both add to it, or is it sort of the same stuff every time? Like what is your advice on these stand-ups and whether to have an agenda?
Yeah. So, what I use as a structure, I will usually craft an agenda based on that structure, which is sort of a warm up. I'm going to ask topical questions, and then, some high value questions that are going to get us to where we want to be, and then some takeaways. And then I craft my agenda around that. I do not ask my executive to contribute to that agenda because he doesn't have time, and creating things that like he misses only makes him feel worse. So it's better to allow him the freedom and flexibility to sort of just add to those as the meeting is going on. But usually he wouldn't remember anything that he needed to add to the agenda, candidly. If you have an executive who is really like on top of their organizational life and it would be happy to add, context and items to the agenda beforehand, please absolutely leverage that. I for sure encourage it. And then what was the second one?
So it was just whether you would add an agenda, and would you have it open so you both can add items, basically?
Yeah, yeah. If that's something that your executive can handle, I really discourage assistants from creating work or work streams that your executive can't meet because it causes tension in your relationship. Because your executive operates that they operate with this cognitive dissonance, knowing that they haven't met expectations habitually, and then they begin to subconsciously, usually this happens, is to subconsciously resent you for being the person that's creating work streams that they can't manage. So if you have a boss who can and is like totally on board, please definitely open the agenda up to them. But if you know that it's out of their scope and their bandwidth, I would refrain from doing it.
Um, do I ask the question if they want to add the agenda, or should I just, hold on, let me just scroll up because I can't see it a second. Or do I just try and gauge it by myself? This is in the chat. So do I ask if they want to add to the agenda, or should I just see and try and gauge it for myself? So I think that's basically what you're answering right
Yeah, I
there.
would just ask them in your one-on-one, at your next one-on-one, just let them know like, hey, you know what? I learned a couple team things, been doing some professional development. I wanted to add this new element into our working style. Is this something that you would want to add to, or would it be best if I just drove the agenda each week? That's totally appropriate to ask.
Okay. And then Marianne has asked, how did you persuade them that you would be a remote assistant? But this was a remote assistant role, wasn't it? You were
Yeah.
applying for a
So
remote assistant role.
Yeah, so I decided that I was not going to go into the office anymore. At my previous company, I worked from home 1 day a week, and whenever it was necessary. Sometimes there were blackouts in San Francisco and stuff like that. So I was working from home 1 day a week. My husband Brian was working from home 3 days a week, and then prior to that, at Sephora, I worked from home generally when my boss was not in the office. So we had 2 kids at the time and just decided like we were not going to have office jobs anymore, that we wanted to travel, we wanted the freedom to explore Europe, to go on vacation when we wanted, which is why we both work in tech, because a large majority of tech companies offer unlimited or incredibly generous PTO. And I didn't want to be beholden by like, oh, have I taken 5 days or 3 days, and like living in fear about that kind of thing. So that's why I intentionally transitioned into a tech company out of prestige beauty, because I could have gone to like L'Oreal or LVMH. But they didn't offer those kinds of perks. So I was like, no, I'm going to go to companies that offer those kinds of perks. And then I would say, you can become a remote assistant in your current role. But I would think it would probably be something closer to like working from home 1 or 2 days a week, like I was in my previous role. If you work for even a partially remote company, the chances are you probably can work from home the majority of time.
I think that's great. I could say right now, Marianne, that mostly everyone's working remote at the moment.
Yeah, well,
And this
yeah,
is a really
exactly.
great time to show how good of a player you can be on a remote board, basically. And I think it's really important to now show how this is a time to distinguish yourself if you don't feel that you've done so already, or at least distinguish yourself as a remote assistant. I
Yeah,
have
definitely.
felt like, as Ebony said, she's worked remotely before in the past in different ways. I've worked remotely, even as when I was an office manager, where you really need to be in the office. But in 2 of my office manager roles, I worked from home quite a bit. And I think as everyone's learning, it's not the vacation
No.
that bosses used to think it was. It was, you're a little behind on your laundry today, so you need to work from home. It's like, no, I have a project. I need my head down. I know when to interrupt me.
Exactly.
And I can work through my commute time, and kind of, and really put my head down. I think people are realizing now, like I've heard a lot of people saying like, I've had, like my day doesn't end. Like I find that I'm working in my commute time in the morning. I think we had somebody say that in the call last week. Actually, Francois was the one that asked the question about onboarding. So we have her to thank for the inspiration for our new call, or our new course, if and when we, I think it's just
Yes.
when we do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Good. We're on the same page. So just because, again, that was a great segue into one of these other questions that I have. So this is talking about, this question is going to be about working a non-linear workday. So one, talking about working too many hours or getting comfortable with working less hours, actually, and concentrating on output and not input. So that's why tech companies are totally all about, or many of them have no recorded paid time off. I've worked for companies with unlimited holidays, unlimited vacation days, unlimited sick days. And the only reason why we did track, we had like a big company calendar where everyone could put when they would be out of the office, but that was it. Some people truly thought we were still tracking it. I was like, I'm the office manager. I got other stuff to do. I'm not tracking this. I'm telling you this right now. If it was anyone's job, it would be mine. And I'm not. I just need to know if there's a fire in this building, you're not here. Like that's it. Or if somebody says, can you set up a meeting with this person, I can figure out you never replied because you were gone, because they don't put it in their own calendar. So it was forcing me to do that. but you work with leaders and staff in different time zones. Would you say there are set office hours for your organization, or is it more around some central meetings and producing quality output within deadlines, or is it something else entirely? Because I know you've talked to me about Twist before, and I looked into it a bit, and it seemed to be more on this non-linear sort of
Yes.
communication path. So I wanted that. This is a question from me. So the question, so let me just reiterate. So do you have set office hours sort of that the company works around? Or is it more non-linear?
Yeah, so we operate totally nonlinear, and we use a remote first mindset that like anyone can be anywhere at any time. So you should not conduct your work without that in mind. You should always have that first as a first principle for working from. We have people in China, in Australia, and in New York and California, Germany, Poland, just to name a few. So what that means is that when it's Friday here, it's Saturday in Australia for people over there. So um, everything is really focused on the output that you're doing, not connecting together. So what we usually do is we have our Central European time, and folks will try to get together who are in Central European time around their work streams. PT folks generally try to do work around their work streams. And then we have some overlap between those where like some Central European people will say, hey, I'll stretch and make this meeting if it's really a top priority, which forces us to have incredibly efficient and well-documented meetings, because we realize that now people are up and it's 8 p.m. and they're stretching to be on PT time. So we need to be incredibly respectful of their time. But we expect that people sort of get their work done when they get it done. No one is like required to check in per se or anything like that. I will say that for assistants, some of our executives prefer that they be at least live in their time zone or be willing to work in those hours, those time zone hours. Some don't require any overlap. Like my assistant will get to it tomorrow or whenever she wakes up. And that's how I work with my team anyway. So it doesn't matter if my assistant isn't doing this right now. So it varies for assistants, but my boss is always up.
You said this. You said the other day to me, you were like, he's up.
Yes. Yeah, he's up. I'm like, go to sleep now. We are, like I mentioned previously, we are launching a cryptocurrency that has the propensity to sort of outstrip Bitcoin and Ethereum. It really is the first of its kind. He invented a file sharing network with a native token built in. He had the largest, he created the largest SAFT in the history of funding. So he raised over $250 million with no profit. Like our company is not profitable, which is an insane amount to raise in a single round. If you know anything about like the companies in YC and Y Combinator, excuse me. So there's a lot on his shoulders right now, a ton. So he's up, I want to say like probably 16 or 17 hours out of the day. And then like we'll sleep for 4 or 5 hours.
And by up, you mean working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Working.
Yeah. So, so what you're basically saying is, just so I'm collecting this correctly, is that there are several different work streams that kind of, and everyone's just kind of vaguely aware of them, and that you are aware of the European team and the Pacific team, and then your boss's work stream as an assistant. So you're kind of aware of that when you're setting all these meetings. I think last week part of that was emotional calendaring is what you called it, right?
Yeah. So emotionally intelligent calendaring is the ability to sort of intentionally consider the bandwidth issues, locational differences, and priorities of each individual when working on a schedule. It can be really tough, but it's incredibly important in keeping morale high, which we know like directly correlates to productivity. When morale starts to dip because people are frustrated, they're back in a toxic late meeting, and they're stretching, missing dinner with their kids, they're going to begrudgingly be there. They'll be distracted. So we really focus on our admins having a deep understanding of what it means to be emotionally intelligent in their calendaring. It's actually one of the like competencies that we interview for.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Okay. So, Francois just asked a question, but I'm going to come back to that. And Marta just said that's like me, always up, and that is true. I was just saying how basically I have to, because I have to work after my children go to bed to get anything done, and because we try and record as much stuff as possible at night, and then I try and get up before them to get as much done. Like today, I was able to get up before them, and I got so much done. I couldn't believe it was only 10:30 by the time I'd like
Oh, that's
looked at the
awesome.
clock. Yeah, it was amazing. By the time I looked at the clock. But if you're going to bed late and waking up early, I literally have scheduled in a nap time for me
Yes. Yeah.
to just catch up. But
Yeah.
so Marta is very right. Okay, um so just going back to you talking about stand-ups before. So I asked this in the question, I asked this question, or I brought this up before to you. And I just think it's worth asking again so that everyone here hears it. Because somebody brought this up in Slack, which was, she is a very empowered assistant. She is often in meetings with her executive all the time, but since going remote, she is being left out. So some execs have reverted back to excluding EAs from conversations, albeit probably unintentional. So we don't have as much context as usual and feeling like we're all being reactive. So she is a great EA and she's going in there, she's trying to find things, but it's feels like it's double work when normally she just would have walked into the meeting with someone. So what advice do you give for someone who is now remote and is not used to being excluded from meetings and not really sure how to claw that back?
So a couple of things. The first thing I would say is if you own your executive's calendar and the meeting is sufficiently broad, you should just hop in the Zoom room or the Microsoft Teams room or whatever software you all are using. I would just hop in the meeting, especially if it's sufficiently broad. I've never worked in an organization where a broad meeting would be off limits to an assistant. If it is not a broad meeting and you own your executive's calendar and you have full awareness and visibility to where they're going, I would explicitly ask and say like, hey, I saw this meeting on the calendar. I'd like to attend. Do you have any issues with that? Or, is that a big problem? If they're intentionally saying like, no, I don't think you should be there. I would definitely respectfully push back and ask why. I think that assistants need to be clear that this role is a high context role. And the way we can best facilitate your work is to have full context. That's what I always say. Like, context is one of the most powerful tools in our arsenal, period. In order to do highly effective calendaring and help preserve relationships. Like I noticed in the last meeting that Susan was upset and she was really looking forward to having this meeting go through. I'm going to make sure that we stretch and make sure that happens. It also allows us to act as a surrogate on behalf of our executive. And that's how we actually save them time. So I think having a conversation about the importance of putting that context tool into your arsenal to make you the best assistant that you can be. Like, here's the thing, like the relationship should never be combative. If your executive wants to have you to make an exponential impact, which is exactly why they hire assistants, in my estimation, they're looking for an exponential impact, right? If that's what they want, then they should really buy into the notion that context is one of the most powerful tools that an assistant can have in order to be a surrogate for you, right? That means I don't have to ask you to download me after you just had a conversation and are intellectually exhausted, don't have the emotional bandwidth to communicate it again with me. It also means that I'm not sitting around looking foolish. I feel very comfortable being candid and vulnerable with my boss in saying like, what makes me feel empowered is to have the autonomy to make smart strategic decisions. And the only way that that can happen for me is to have context. This is a high context role, meaning that like, it has nothing to do with me being nosy or wanting to be judgmental. I'm happy to sit in any meeting as an observer. And in our company, what that looks like is we mute ourselves and we also turn our camera off so that any movements we're making aren't potentially distracted to attendees. So I also join meetings in an observer mode all the time, just as an observer. I'm there to absorb and to get context and to acclimate to the situation and the environment so I can make smart strategic choices on behalf of my executive. If they are not supportive after you've had that conversation, please do it in your one-on-one write down your thoughts. I really encourage you to write these thoughts down before you go into this conversation, to ask for more context. If they're not receptive to that, I would say that they're looking for somebody who is less of a thought partner, less of a business partner, and maybe more of kind of like, can you just, maybe more be boxed in, which if that's something you're comfortable with, more power to you. No shade, no tea. I think you just, that's great. But if they are still resistant and you want more, I personally would, I always say this, quietly brush up your resume and, set your LinkedIn to looking, reach out to your network, and consider potentially another role. But if it's unintentional exclusion, I think it really is just a communication issue of saying, hey, I see this meeting coming on your calendar. I know we're trying to push this big project. I need some context on how the marketing push is going, when the pinning summit is going live, et cetera. I'd like to join, these meetings for the next 3 weeks. Sounds great. Yeah, please do, is usually what the answer is. I would be very hesitant if that was not the answer.
I think that is very good advice.
Can that person follow up? I'm sorry, who asked that? Because I would love to know, like, is that something your executive is supportive of?
Here. I don't know if she's here at the moment. But that was Catherine in Slack. So you might want to just message.
Yeah, I'll message her in Slack. I would love to know sort of where her executive stands on that line.
Yeah, I think she has she has a really good relationship with her executive. I think it's more things that aren't on the calendar, like someone just sends a text or a WhatsApp and then they jump into a call or something. That might not even be Zoom. It might just be a phone call.
A one-off.
Yeah, exactly. And that they're happening more and more. And
I would imagine that's interesting. I would imagine that's true. What I call those are information silos. And I'm always working to penetrate those information silos by doing things like prioritizing my one-on-one and asking high value questions, right? So I would follow up, especially in my one-on-one each week with, hey, did you have any strategic meetings or follow-up action items that came out of any conversations that I wasn't a part of this week? Lately, and don't be afraid to be candid, respectfully. Lately, there have been a lot of conversations that I haven't been privy to. Would love to make sure I get a full download of that information so I can best assist you. Something to that effect.
I think that's really good advice. And I think she does have a very good relationship with her executive. I've talked to her one-on-one before. Awesome. But this has been like, when you're so involved, it's almost like a little bit of a jolt, a little bit of a knock that kind of set her back. So I'm going to ask this question, then we'll go to the question that Francois, who is like the fantastic Riddler that she is. She's asking great questions. So in the course, you talk about being opportunistic and turning your attention to what's been left behind. You suggest looking at industry sites and forums to find opportunities for growth and improvement. Can you give an example of this that you've done? Or just give an example for people to understand better what you mean.
Yeah, so I'm talking about things like important relationship meetings are being neglected, hiring practices are stale and stagnant and therefore unproductive. People are grumbling about wanting more transparency. It probably hasn't, maybe bubbled up to the executive team. There's no articulated best practice for X or Y. Recently, for example, at my company, there was no articulated best practice for Slack. Even though we're a fully remote company and have been for 5 years, we didn't have, this was something that continually gets pushed below the line of what must be done. So what I'm always doing is I'm looking for opportunities to tackle all of the things that fall below that must be done line, right? I see myself as this sounds really weird, but a hole plugger. If there's a boat and there's holes, somebody needs to put their fingers in those holes to plug the hole to keep the boat together.
These say this is holes. Filling in the gaps, or everyone's juggling and there's some balls that are on fire.
Right. Exactly.
Plucking them out, or they're smoldering, but everyone's kind of ignoring them before they catch.
Right, because it's not a flaming fire yet, right?
But no, I get the hole plugger.
Yeah. So I'm so for example, let's say there's no best practices. What you should do is find out what those items are. Like what is falling below the must-do list? What keeps getting, and it really becomes a thorn in everyone's side after a time because they're like, oh, we still can't get to this. We still haven't gotten to this. Find out what those items are. And then like take ownership of them, right? So we don't have a best practice on this. So now what I'm going to do is ask myself a couple of strategic questions. How are other organizations addressing this? What best practices do they have that we might be able to tailor to our organization? What tasks does your team keep saying? If you keep the meeting minutes, then you probably know what those things are that are always, they're on the to-do list, but like every week they get pushed over to the next week. You know what? We weren't able to do that. We had to deprioritize. We're going to get it done next week. If you don't take the meeting minutes and you don't know what those things are, go to your team and ask. So I assume that most of you are either reporting to or supporting a C-level or a departmental EVP or director or vice president. Go to their team. I had really strong relationships when I supported the SVP at Sephora before I was promoted to the CEO. I had amazing relationships with his entire leadership team, which was a team of about 80 people, mind you. I mean, Sephora was giant. So, I mean, for a lot of people, that's like reporting to the CEO of a small company. So I had really great working relationships with everyone on his leadership team. We had weekly one-on-ones, which I also suggest to every assistant. If you do not have one-on-ones with your boss's direct reports, you should institute those. Like we'll do that in our onboarding course because that's what I always put in there as the first thing is like I onboard with my boss, and the next important group is every single one of his direct reports better know me, know what our priorities are, know that they need to come through me, things have changed, etc. So I had great working relationships with all of his direct reports. I could always source any sore spots that people didn't have bandwidth or time to get to. The first thing I did in my first 30 days was like completely revamp the office ordering system, which had been neglected, and everyone was so relieved when like we had a system in place that was like, okay, great. Now I open this spreadsheet. I know everything's going to be ordered on Wednesday. If I don't get it in by this time, it will not be ordered until next week. Structure felt good. Even though it was new, it felt really good. So check out how other organizations are doing this. How can you tailor this to your own organization? Check in with stakeholders who might be invested in this. Start a small working group like I did with our Slack best practices. We've gotten a ton of great information that we're going to be presenting to the leadership to sort of sign off on. So lots of opportunities to find, holes to plug or gaps to fill.
Holes to plug.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know that's like so weird.
No, I love it. And one of the other reasons why I love you is because you say things that I say in my own way as well. And one, it's nice to feel like, somebody else
Right, yeah.
gets it. And so I'm in that, the Future Assistant Summit.
Yeah.
That's next month. And I was talking to Nikki Christmas today, and I was saying this is funny because it's like all these things we're talking about, like I was saying today.
Yeah.
And one was like, I do struggle because one question that's been coming up a lot lately is, what do I do with my time? I'm so used to being next to my boss or being just outside, and now we're remote. I don't know what to do with my time. And I want to be like #can't relate, because I don't know how, if other than experience, but someone that's usually drawn to this job is a problem solver. And
Right.
So we want to jump in there and solve problems. And what you're basically saying is these being opportunistic is be a problem solver. People complain all the time at work. Different
Exactly.
issues come up. So if you're just paying attention, you can really prove your worth by seeing these things. And
Absolutely.
also, what you said about the ordering, I think is really important, is if you create a system and you think you've done something really great, or you've learned about it, you've created it, make sure that you make yourself a copy.
Right.
And that you don't leave it there.
Yes.
You give
so
them their
true.
copy, but you make a generic copy, because you create so many things. So one, create a handbook that you can hand over to the next person. Because I think nothing is worse than creating like all these amazing systems and they get lost. It's a waste. It's unkind to the next assistant.
Yeah.
And two, make yourself a copy and
Yes.
make sure, because you'll get to the next place and you'll be like, oh
What
shit.
did I do? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, anybody who's got kids in the background. Sorry. Like, oh no, I had this whole travel preferences spreadsheet and form, and why didn't I take it with me? And then you're contacting people you used to work with, and you're like, you screenshot this thing. And not that anyone would have minded, but just forgetting to do it. So make sure
Yeah.
that you do
I
create a
take
system.
everything with me.
Yes, exactly.
I take everything. I mean,
Yeah.
it's when I left Sephora, I had a complete, like, a ginormous folder of like all of my all hands templates. Like I used to, like, I primarily focused on like, curating all of Calvin's presentations. I wrote his blog. So I have like all of that information. So when I go to the next person, I can add, tweak, and tailor.
Exactly.
And then I take that and then I can add and tweak and tailor. Every role is different, but it's so great to have that foundational like book of knowledge. It's awesome.
I think that's totally true. And it's also like your own little assistant life handbook. And
Exactly.
so like I'm talking to members right now about writing courses. There are members here that are really good at one particular thing, or of course more, but they're a fountain of
Expertise in a
knowledge.
certain, yeah.
That's the whole reason I built the community, was this shared knowledge and knowing this
Yeah.
was out there. So like, and when we
Yes.
say at the beginning, we were talking about everyone rising up together. This is why, like, if anyone's ever interested in writing a course or feel something, or something comes up and you go, oh, I know about this. You don't be surprised if I'm like, hey, and DM,
Yes,
slide into your
exactly.
DMs and be like, hey, or even a mini course. It doesn't have to be a full course, but because I feel there is knowledge that should be recorded and shared in our
Yes.
community. So this leads us to, again, amazing transitions. We could be like on a news show today, the way this is going. So Francois has said, when is it too soon to be asking about training when starting a new role? i.e., if they would be willing to sponsor training like the E2 conference next week. She only joined her company in the last week and wants to ask for time off as it starts at 3 p.m. UK time, but not sure if it's too soon to be asking. So I'm just going to interject here first, real quick.
Yeah.
Just to say that the answer is it's never too soon. Start in the interview process, set the tone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Set the tone. And I'm not saying this as someone that runs a training program. I'm saying this as an assistant, that the sooner you can set that tone, the better. And if you're only a week in, like this is a really great time where you can set the tone that I'm a strategic business partner. I need this information from you on this executive questionnaire. I've got a questionnaire. I know this is what I do when I onboard myself. I go through this questionnaire because I know she's thinking about using the executive questionnaire that I have a template for. And then as part of that, you say, I am involved in lots of training, and during this time, training is more important than ever. And you bring it up conversationally, you make sure you get to know them and you have this common ground, but you just say, I would like to go to this. Would you consider sponsoring me? Or you start the conversation by saying, do you ever offer training to other employees? Back them into a corner. Ask them. This is genuinely when I've done this. This is not me BSing. This is just genuinely what I've done, because I can't tell you how many members of our community pay for this themselves. And it makes me crazy because there's no reason why you should be treated any different than anyone at your company, right?
Yeah.
And it is very hard. That's why I make it so cost effective, because I do know it's still a struggle. But there's ways to ask it. And I think one way is by bringing up training for other people, or I saw so-and-so is training. Or if you're too nervous, just send it over in an email. But you should always ask. If they say no, it was a no before you asked. So it's a no if you never ask. So I think that's one really important way. And then also you said take time off. You're working remotely probably. So is it possible you can have it playing in the background while you're working? Do you even really need to ask for the time off unless you fully want to concentrate? I get that. But sometimes you can do work while listening, or kind of, swap around your time. I think, as Ebony was saying, like this nonlinear day, you kind of can make room to do stuff and then work a little later or whatever. It's a very small company. I'm the only EA and there's only one other PA. Oh God. Okay. That's what she's saying. So that is my answer to that question. So I'm going to leave it to Ebony now to just give her. 2 cents?
Sure. So I for sure agree with starting in the interview process. It's something I ask when they say, "Do you have questions for us?" If I'm, deep into the interview process, especially with whoever I'm going to be potentially supporting, um, I ask like for two things. So mutual investment in the work that we're doing, which means that when I ask you to do something, you commit to saying, hey, this is part of making our relationship work really well. And I don't want to work with any executive who doesn't make that commitment. So I always ask it in the interview. And the second is an investment in my own professional development. What does that look like from this company? What does my professional growth like rank in the priorities of getting me into this role? So I really encourage all assistants to ask in the interview. That being said, yeah, I think that if a company would not be willing to support you in a $50 conference, I would, be concerned. Um, I personally don't, this isn't like a $1,500 conference. Like I know some of them are incredibly expensive. Like I personally would say like, yeah, $1,500. That's really high. Even at Sephora, I was the only one who went on those conferences. And then I had to do a download for the rest of the organization of admins. That's really high. But this is a $50 conference. Here's what I will say. Anything I talk about, you're welcome to email me and DM me in either Slack or Instagram, and I will share all of my information with you for free. So please don't worry about that. If you honestly can't afford to go, do not worry. I will share anything that I am talking about totally with you. I have no problem doing that. But yeah, I think because it's $50, I would definitely have concerns if they were like, well, no, for $50, we don't think that, you deserve $50 worth of professional development. Like Lauren's whole system is incredibly affordable. Like, no, we don't think you deserve an extra $19 a month for professional development. I have concerns. Like, I honestly would just really be concerned about like the integrity of the organization, your perceived value, because if they don't even think that like you're worth, a $20 a month of professional development, I just, I would be concerned. But no time is too soon to ask. If you really are concerned, yeah, absolutely send an email. And also if they say no and you really can't afford it, we do offer scholarships that Melissa has generously offered. My company is sponsoring the conference as well. And also like just DM me. I'm happy to share like anything that I share at the conference for free too. Like no problem.
Okay. Isn't she the best? Honestly. But I think, that's one of the reasons why I think I was so attracted to you was that your heart's in the right place and that you really do want to share that information. Oh, see, Francois is amazing. Thank you. See?
Yeah, absolutely, Francois.
Okay. So I'm encouraging everyone now, if there are any questions that have not been asked, now's the time to pop them in those Q&As, because otherwise this will be my last question. And the absolute best both. Thanks, Tracy. And so if you have any questions, now's the time, because we want everyone to get back to your dinners and stuff. I'd love to hear some feedback in the chat. Like, has this been helpful? Is it getting your mind going about thinking about remote work differently? And I'm sure everyone's having challenges right now. So any feedback in the chat is really helpful, because at the moment, like, all your comments are fantastic, but sometimes especially in all these Zoom calls, it feels like you're talking to a screen a lot. I could see Ebony, but they were just really nice. But sometimes when I'm doing all these recordings, it's always nice to see some comments and feedback and make sure that we are getting you the information that you need. So this is going to be the last question from me, so that we can better advise our executives who are now in charge of vast remote workforces, not knowing how to do this exactly. How do your executive and leadership teams help support your remote workforce and create a high trust and accountability environment? So they're already used to a remote environment. We've got all these new executives, or these executives that are thrust into the same type of workforce. So how do you think that, like, how are they good at curating that and making it work?
Yeah, so a couple things. I say there's three keys that we use in our organization that I think are really important. So meeting daily or weekly, but it is either daily or weekly. I wouldn't suggest anything less than that. And that can be as simple as sort of a Slack bot checking in to make sure that they're are aligned on goals, outputs, and work streams. The second thing I will say is unblock. For me, this is like the most important. This is the primary role of leaders to unblock the talented people that they hired and empower them to do their best work. If they are not working proactively and intentionally to unblock them, people become disinterested, they check out, and they stop being productive. Um, we make it a point in our organization to check in daily with people, and we ask two key questions. So, is there anything blocking you, and how can I support you? A lot of times when there isn't space for people to communicate that up to leadership and say, hey, I'm being blocked here, this is stopping me from succeeding, that it allows it to fester, and then we stop missing deadlines. People don't know who was in charge. Well, I didn't do this because Shannon didn't do her part, but nobody was told that that part wasn't happening. So if leaders are not intentionally working on unblocking, then it won't happen. They're the people. Leaders are plumbers. Their job is to unclog the pipes so that the talented people who push water and all of that stuff through can do their best work. And then the third thing I say is cyclical feedback. So in our organization, we really believe in the power of feedback as a renewable resource, but we do not believe that feedback should be one-sided. It's a circle. So feedback comes up. So leaders need to be sourcing upward feedback, period, across the board. And I would really encourage people in remote teams to be leaders in remote teams to be sourcing upward feedback. And then they also offer feedback weekly to their direct reports. So when they meet, there is feedback for you. Hey, your performance this week has been outstanding. I know you've had a ton of stress with potentially your cousin being sick and you showed up. I'm super excited for that. A couple things I heard is just, we want to make sure that we're still communicating when, things are blocked or things are stressed. So keep that up. Do you have feedback for me? Opening that space up is how you build deep trust within your teams. That's how leaders do it, by saying, I don't have all the answers. And my job isn't to pretend that I have all the answers. It's to accurately capture our collective intelligence and can keep us focused on our North Star. That's what the job of leaders is. So those are the three things: sort of meeting daily, unblocking, and cyclical feedback are really where I think leaders can build trust and accountability to keep their teams highly productive. So if you're going to offer some wise counsel, that's what I would say.
It's interesting because those three bits of feedback you've said basically are things assistants should be doing as well. And therefore they are leaders.
Exactly.
Right.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I'm in the process of getting my certification as a distributed manager of teams, because I am my boss's manager. That's when I go into my role, like my boss doesn't have a manager. So he relies on me to be his manager. I manage his time, his emotional bandwidth, and his intellectual investment in any given project. So we're definitely managers 100%.
I love that. And again, something I was saying today, that we manage other people's lives, that we have assistant in the title, which I don't have a problem with, as long as everyone's under that understanding. Like, we have weird words for stuff all the time, and we just accept them. So I know there's like always a big argument on whether we are assistants or what our title should be or whatever. But as long as you go in and set that tone from the beginning and you understand what your role is, and it jives with who you are, and then you do become, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, you become a leader. You become someone people lean on and look to when stuff's hitting the fan and when they need help. And that is, a leader who serves, but that's a leader. So I think that's really interesting. So again, thank you, Ebony, so much. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for all our new members. It's so lovely to see you. We are definitely, I'm so sad. We like to be talking, like I was saying, how I haven't really talked to her that much this week, but we were talking like every day before. And it's so weird because I was doing the course. I'm like catching up on the next one. And I'm like, you're like my work buddy.
I know.
I was like, is there a spot? Can I just sit in like on the side, just have a little window open on your screen just every now and just like wave? Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for coming. Marta, it's okay. It will happen again sooner than you realize.
Yeah.
That is so Marta. Well, thank you all for coming. Ebony, thank you so much. You know I love you. You're a goddess. I love you. Can't say it enough. And I love everyone that came. They obviously know your value, and this course was incredible and amazing. The feedback has been absolutely as good as I knew.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy, so much. And but we'll let everybody go. Enjoy your days and your evenings wherever you are. We love you.
Yes.
Thank you, Ebony.
Okay, awesome, Francois. See you at the conference.
Yay!
See you, everyone.